The longship's prow cut through the slate-grey sea, its dragon head seeking the English shore like a predator scenting blood. Magne Grimson stood at the helm, his knuckles white against the wormwood as he watched the coastline draw closer. Wind whipped his auburn hair back from his face, revealing a jagged scar that sliced from temple to jaw, a reminder of the first English raid that had taken his father's life and marked him forever as a warrior of vengeance. "Odin guides our path," growled Halvar, Magne's uncle and the Jarl who led their clan. "The English dogs will pay tribute in silver and blood." Magne nodded, eyes fixed on the approaching shore. For 5 summers now, he had joined the raids, earning his place among the fiercest warriors of their clan. Each raid brought him closer to fulfilling the blood oath he had sworn over his father's pyre, to bring suffering to the English until the scales of vengeance were balanced. The English were cowards who hid behind stone walls and wooden crosses, incapable of honor or courage. This was the truth Magne had built his life upon. The men around him readied their axes and shields, their faces painted with coal and woad in patterns meant to frighten their enemies and curry favor with the gods. Magne touched the Thor's hammer that hung at his neck, muttering a prayer for strength as the longship's keel scraped against the pebbled beach. For Ragnar, the warriors shouted as they leaped into the shallow water, weapons raised. Magne followed, his boots splashing in the surf as he charged forward. "For my father," he whispered to himself, "and for the honor of our clan." The coastal village before them was small, its thatched roofs appearing like hunchbacks in the morning mist. Smoke curled from cooking fires, and the sounds of livestock echoed in the distance. Magne had expected the alarm bells to ring, for the villagers to flee in terror as they always did. Instead, the silence was broken only by a single woman who stood at the edge of the village, a bow in her hand. She was tall for an Englishwoman, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Her stance was proud, her bow drawn with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. She wore a simple woolen dress, dyed blue, with an apron and a cloak fastened at her shoulder with a brooch of twisted silver. "Halt," she called in accented Norse that surprised Magne. "This village has nothing for you. Turn back to your ships." A ripple of laughter moved through the Viking warriors. One man stepped forward, axe raised, but Magne caught his arm. "She speaks our tongue," he said, his curiosity piqued despite himself. The woman did not lower her bow. "I am Lyra Ravenson, daughter of Ravenson the trader. My father sailed with Northmen for 20 summers before settling here. I know your ways, and I know you seek easy prey. We are not that." As she spoke, villagers emerged from behind her, not cowering women and children, but men and women alike, armed with farming implements, bows, and a few swords. They were outnumbered, but their faces showed determination, not fear. Halvar pushed forward, towering over Magne. "Stand aside, woman. We will take what we want." "You will find only death here," Lyra replied, her arrow still aimed at his heart. "Our people have prepared for your kind." Something in her unflinching gaze made Magne pause. This was not the England he knew, not the cowering villagers who begged for mercy. Here was something unexpected, something that did not fit with the story of English weakness he had carried since childhood. Before he could speak, a horn sounded from the hills behind the village. Saxon warriors approach, he called one of the Vikings from the rear. "Many men on horseback." Halvar cursed. "Back to the ships. This village is not worth a battle with armed warriors." As the Vikings retreated, Magne found himself lingering, his eyes locked with Lyra's. She lowered her bow slightly, a flicker of something, not fear, but perhaps curiosity, crossing her face. "Your people will pay when we return," Magne called to her, unable to leave without some promise of vengeance. Lyra's lip curled. "Your threats are as empty as your honor, Northman." The word struck Magne like a physical blow. As he turned to follow his kinsman back to the ships, her words echoed in his mind. Empty honor. No Englishwoman should dare speak to him of honor. The raid continued down the coast, and they found easier targets, villages unprepared, monasteries filled with treasure. But through it all, Magne found himself haunted by Lyra's words and the way her people had stood ready to defend their homes rather than flee. When the Vikings returned to their settlement in the fjords of their homeland as autumn winds began to blow, Magne carried more than silver and slaves. He carried a question he had never before considered: could there be honor among the English? Winter descended on the Norse lands with its customary ferocity. Snow piled against longhouses, and the fjord froze so thick that men could cross it on foot. Inside the great hall, tales were told around the fire of summer raids and glories won. Magne sat among his kinsmen, drinking mead and listening to the skald sing of brave deeds, but his mind often drifted to the English village and the woman who had stood against them. When spring thawed the fjord and the ships were readied for the summer raids, Magne found himself volunteering to lead a smaller vessel, separate from his uncle's main fleet. Halvor approved, believing his nephew sought greater glory through independent raiding. Take Ulf and Steiner, Halvor advised. They are skilled warriors who will follow your lead. Find silver and slaves, and return with honor. Magne nodded, but in his heart, he knew he sought something else, answers to questions that had haunted him through the long winter nights. The crossing was rough, spring storms tossing the ship like a child's toy. By the time they sighted the English coast, Magne and his crew of 12 were weary and short-tempered. But fortune favored them as they landed under cover of darkness on a familiar stretch of beach. We scout first, Magne instructed his men. I want to know the strength of the village before we attack. Hidden in the forest's edge, Magne watched the village for 2 days. It was the same one from the previous summer, Lyra's village. He saw her moving among the people, organizing watches, training younger villagers with bow and spear. There were more defenses now, a wooden palisade under construction, lookout posts, even trenches being dug around the perimeter. On the 3rd day, as Magne watched from his hiding place, he witnessed something unexpected. A group of mounted warriors arrived, led by a man in fine clothing and mail. The villagers greeted him with obvious displeasure. The tax collector comes again, muttered Steiner, who had been watching beside Magne. The English lord demands payment from his people. Magne observed the interaction with growing interest. The lord's men pushed villagers aside, entering homes and emerging with sacks of grain and coins. When one farmer protested, a soldier struck him down. Then Lyra stepped forward, confronting the lord with the same fierce pride she had shown to the Vikings. Though Magne was too far away to hear her words, her posture told the story clearly: defiance. The lord backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground. Something hot and unexpected flared in Magne's chest at the sight, not satisfaction at seeing an enemy humbled, but anger at the injustice of it. They suffer under their own lords as much as from our raids, Magne said softly, the realization shifting something fundamental in his understanding. All the better for us, Steiner replied with a grin. Weakens them for our taking. But Magne was not so certain anymore. He watched as the lord and his men departed with their plunder, leaving the villagers to tend to their wounded pride and emptied storerooms. That night, as his men slept in their hidden camp, Magne made a decision that defied everything he had been taught about the English. Alone, he approached the village, unarmed except for a small knife at his belt. The risk was enormous. If caught, he would be killed without honor, far from home, his name forgotten. He found Lyra alone, tending to medicinal herbs in a small garden behind what he assumed was her home. When she sensed his presence, she whirled, a small blade appearing in her hand. "You," she hissed, recognizing him despite the months that had passed. "Have you come to fulfill your empty threat, Viking?" Magne raised his hands to show he carried no weapon. I come alone and in peace. Her laugh was bitter. There is no peace with your kind. I watched today, Magne said, ignoring her scorn. I saw how your lord treats you. Something flickered in Lyra's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that he had witnessed their humiliation. And did it please you, Northman? To see others do your work of bringing us misery? No, Magne answered honestly. It did not please me. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. Finally, Lyra lowered her blade slightly. Why are you here? She demanded. I want to understand, Magne replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. Why you fight when others flee? Why you speak our tongue? Why your people stand together when others scatter? Lyra studied his face, searching for deception. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, for she gestured to a rough wooden bench nearby. Sit, she commanded. And I will tell you of my father, who sailed with Northmen and learned that not all are beasts, though many choose to act as such. Through the quiet night, Lyra spoke of her father, a man who had been taken as a child by Vikings but had earned his freedom and respect among them. He had returned to England with knowledge of Norse ways, teaching his daughter their language and customs, preparing his village for the raids that would inevitably come. He taught us that fear is what kills most who face your kind, Lyra said. That standing together gives strength where running brings only death. Magne listened, the foundations of his beliefs crumbling further with each word. Your father sounds like a man of honor. He was, Lyra replied, her voice softening for the first time. Until raiders like you returned 5 summers ago and cut him down as he tried to negotiate peace. The words hit Magne like a blow to the chest. 5 summers ago, his first raid, when his own father had fallen. Could it be? This village, he said slowly. It was raided before. Lyra's eyes hardened again. Yes. The leader was a giant of a man called Grimson. My father approached him under a flag of truce, offering silver in exchange for peace. Grimson took the silver, then took my father's life as well. Magne felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath him. Grimson, his father, had been killed on that same raid, but the story told around Norse fires was of English treachery, of a trap set during supposed peace talks. My father died in that raid as well, Magne said quietly. We were told your people violated the truce. Lyra's bitter laugh cut through the night. Is that the lie they told you? It was your people who brought blood to a peaceful exchange. For 5 years, Magne had built his life around avenging his father's death at English hands. Now, faced with a different version of that fatal day, he felt the weight of his blood oath turn to ash in his mouth. I must go, he said suddenly, standing. My men will miss me. Lyra rose as well, her hand returning to her blade. Will you return with them to raid us, now that you know the truth? Magne looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not an enemy but a woman whose life had been shaped by the same violence that had shaped his own. No, he said at last. Not to raid. He slipped away into the darkness, his mind in turmoil. By dawn, he had made his decision. He gathered his men and told them they would seek richer targets further south. Though disappointed, they trusted his judgment and followed him away from Lyra's village. For the remainder of that summer, Magne led his men on raids, but something had changed within him. He found himself establishing rules: no killing of unarmed men, no harming of women or children, taking only what could be spared. His warriors grumbled but obeyed, for his reputation as a fierce fighter remained undiminished. As summer waned and the time approached to return to Norse lands, Magne made one final journey. Alone, under cover of night, he returned to Lyra's village. He found her at the edge of the newly built palisade, keeping watch. This time, she did not reach for a weapon when she saw him. "You've returned," she said simply. "I needed to know more," Magne replied. "About that day when both our fathers died." Lyra regarded him silently for a moment, then nodded. "Come. There is someone you should meet." She led him through the sleeping village to a small hut where an old man sat by a fire, his blind eyes milky in the firelight. "This is Cedric," Lyra said. "He was with my father that day." The old man tilted his head at the sound of their entry. "Who comes with you, Lyra?" "A Northman seeking truth," she answered. "About the day Raven's son fell." Cedric's weathered face creased in a frown. Why would a Northman seek such a tale? "His father was Grimson," Lyra said softly. The old man was silent for a long moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he began to speak of that fateful day. He told of how Raven's son had indeed arranged a peaceful exchange, offering silver in return for the village being spared. Grimson had agreed, accepting the payment, but one of his men, described as having a face half covered in tattoos, had suddenly accused the English of hiding weapons. "It was a lie," Cedric said firmly. "We carried no weapons, as agreed." But this man with a marked face insisted, grew enraged. He struck down one of our men, and then all descended into chaos. Grimson tried to restore order, I remember that clearly. He stepped between your tattooed kinsman and Raven's son, but others had already drawn weapons. In the fighting, both leaders fell. Magne listened, his heart pounding. The tattooed warrior could only be his uncle, Harva, whose face bore the marks of his dedication to Odin. "My uncle," Magne said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He has always claimed it was English treachery that killed my father." "It was his own treachery," Cedric replied without hesitation. "I may be blind now, but I saw clearly that day. Your father and Raven's son both wanted peace. One man's bloodlust destroyed it." Magne sat in stunned silence as the truth he had built his life upon crumbled entirely. His father had not died at English hands but in a chaos created by Harva, the same man who had raised Magne to hate the English, who had nurtured his thirst for vengeance. "Why?" Magne asked, more to himself than anyone else. "Why would he lie?" "Power," Lyra said simply. "With your father gone, did he not become leader?" The truth of her words struck Magne like a physical blow. Harva had indeed become Jarl after his father's death, guiding the clan and shaping Magne into a weapon of vengeance against the very people his father had tried to make peace with. When Magne left the village that night, he carried a weight heavier than any plunder. He returned to his men and led them home across the sea, his mind filled with new purpose. Winter in the Norse lands brought not only snow and ice but also the gathering where disputes were settled and matters of importance decided. It was there that Magne, standing before the assembled clan leaders, publicly challenged Harva's account of his father's death. "I have spoken with witnesses," Magne announced, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "My father did not die by English treachery but in chaos that you, Harva, created." Harva's face darkened with rage. "You take the word of English dogs over your own blood." "I take the word of truth," Magne replied steadily. "My father sought peace. You sought war." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as a storm cloud. Around them, warriors and clan leaders murmured, some in disbelief, others in growing suspicion. Harva stood, his hand moving to his axe. "You dishonor your father's memory with these lies." "I honor his true memory," Magne countered. "Not the false one you created." What followed was inevitable, a challenge, a homegang, a sacred duel to determine truth through combat. As snow fell around the marked dueling ground, uncle and nephew faced each other with axes and shields, the assembled clans watching in grim silence. Hava was larger, stronger, his arms thick with muscle earned through decades of warfare. But Magne was quicker, fueled by a clarity of purpose that had been lacking in all his years of misdirected vengeance. The duel was brutal and swift. When it ended, Hava lay bleeding in the snow, defeated but alive, his admission of guilt forced from unwilling lips. "It is true," he gasped as blood stained the white ground beneath him. "I wanted war, not peace. I wanted to be Jarl." The confession changed everything. Hava was stripped of his position and sent into exile. Magne, as the son of the previous Jarl and victor of the duel, was offered leadership of the clan. But leadership was not what Magne sought. Standing before his people, he spoke words that none had expected. "My father sought peace with the English. I will honor his memory by continuing that work." The declaration was met with mixed reactions, some outrage, some curiosity, some respect. In the end, Magne's cousin Eric was chosen as Jarl, while Magne was granted permission to lead a trading expedition to England when spring arrived. As the ice thawed and ships were prepared, Magne selected his crew carefully, men who valued silver over bloodshed, who saw the wisdom in trade rather than raid. They loaded their ship not with weapons of war but with goods for exchange: furs, amber, walrus ivory, and iron tools. When they reached the English shore, they came not with war cries but with a white flag of truce. Standing on the beach near Lyra's village, Magne waited anxiously to see if they would be greeted with arrows or words. It was Lyra who came to meet them, bow in hand but not drawn, her expression guarded. "You return as traders, not raiders?" she asked skeptically. "Yes," Magne replied. "In honor of my father's true wishes." "And yours?" Lyra studied him and his men, noting the absence of war paint and the presence of trade goods. Finally, she nodded. "You may approach the village. But know that we watch you closely." The initial exchanges were tense, the villagers rightfully suspicious of the Northmen who had so often brought terror to their shores. But as days passed without incident, as fair trades were made and stories shared around evening fires, the barriers began to lower. Magne found himself spending more time with Lyra, their conversations moving beyond the painful past to possibilities for the future. She showed him English farming techniques he had never seen. He demonstrated Norse methods of navigation by sun and stars. Where there had been hostility, a tentative respect began to grow. "Your people are not as I was taught," Magne admitted one evening as they walked along the village perimeter. "Nor are yours," Lyra conceded. "At least, not all of them." As spring warmed into summer, Magne's trading expedition proved successful beyond expectation. The goods they had brought fetched excellent prices, and the English items they acquired would be valuable in Norse lands. More importantly, a foundation of trust had been established, fragile, but real. When the time came for the Norse to depart, Magne found himself reluctant to leave. Standing at the edge of the village with Lyra, he searched for words that seemed inadequate. "I will return next spring," he promised. "With more goods for trade." Lyra's smile was small but genuine. "We will be watching for your sail." Throughout the autumn and winter in his homeland, Magne worked tirelessly to promote the benefits of trade over raid. He spoke of the steady wealth it could bring, the reduced risk of casualties, the possibilities for learning from other peoples. Some scoffed, clinging to the old ways, but others listened, particularly when they saw the quality of goods he had returned with. When spring arrived, Magne set sail with 2 ships instead of 1, both laden with trade goods. This time, several families accompanied the warriors-turned-traders, seeking to establish more permanent connections with the English. They were a month into their trading when disaster struck. Saxon warriors, led by the same lord who had taxed Lyra's village so harshly, arrived with a force too large to resist. They cared nothing for the distinction between raiders and traders. To them, all Northmen were enemies to be driven out or killed. Magne and his people were forced to flee, abandoning one ship and many of their goods. They took refuge in their remaining vessel, anchored in a hidden cove, tending to their wounded and considering their options. It was Lyra who found them there, having tracked them through the forest. "The Lord claims you attacked his men," she said without preamble. "We did no such thing," Magne replied firmly. "We defended ourselves only when attacked." Lyra studied his face, then nodded. "I believe you. But it makes no difference. He has declared all Northmen enemies and forbidden any trade." The news was a devastating blow to Magne's hopes. "Then we must return home," he said heavily. "Or," Lyra suggested, a strange light in her eyes, "you could help us be rid of him." The proposition was startling. "You would rise against your lord." "He is no true lord to us," Lyra replied bitterly. "He takes our grain even when our children hunger. He demands our young men for his battles and returns them broken or not at all. He forbids trade that would help our village prosper." She paused, her expression resolute. "My father believed our peoples could benefit each other. This lord stands in the way of that vision." Magne considered her words carefully. To involve himself in English politics was dangerous. To fight alongside the English against their own lord was unheard of. Yet as he looked at his wounded men, at the families who had trusted his vision of peaceful trade, he knew he could not simply abandon the connections they had begun to forge. "What do you propose?" he asked finally. Lyra's plan was bold. The Saxon lord would soon collect his summer taxes from the village. If Norse warriors, hidden among the villagers, rose up when he arrived with only his personal guard, they might overcome him without the need to face his full army. "It is risky," Magne warned his people when he presented the plan. "If we fail, we die far from home, without honor." "And if we succeed?" asked Steiner, who had become one of Magne's strongest supporters. "If we succeed, we gain allies and trading partners," Magne replied. "We create something new, something better than endless raiding." In the end, 30 Norse warriors agreed to the plan. They entered the village secretly, hiding their distinctive clothing and weapons until the appointed time. When the lord arrived with 20 mounted warriors, the village seemed as it always did, subdued, resigned to their fate. The tax collection began, with sacks of grain and coins being loaded onto pack horses. It was only when the lord called for Lyra, demanding she be brought before him for disrespect shown to his authority, that the plan sprang into action. As village men suddenly produced hidden weapons and Norse warriors emerged from hiding places, the lord's men found themselves surrounded. The fighting was fierce but brief. When it ended, the lord lay dead, and his surviving men had fled to carry word of the rebellion. "They will return with an army," Lyra said grimly as they bound their wounds and buried their dead. "Then we must be gone before they arrive," Magne replied. "All of us?" The village erupted in argument. "Leave their homes? Abandon the land their families had farmed for generations?" But as the reality of their situation became clear, they would be executed as traitors if they remained, the focus shifted to practical concerns. What to take, where to go, how to transport the elderly and young. "Come with us," Magne suggested. "To the Norse lands." The proposal was met with disbelief from both English and Norse alike. "English in the fjords," one of his warriors questioned incredulously. "Norse and English living together," a village elder asked with equal skepticism. "Why not?" Magne challenged them all. "We have land enough. You have skills we value. Together, we would be stronger than apart." The debate raged through the night, but with the threat of Saxon retribution looming, a decision was finally reached. The village would split, some heading north to join relatives in lands not controlled by the dead lord, others accepting Magne's invitation to the Norse territories. In the grey light of dawn, as belongings were packed and children prepared for a journey they did not understand, Magne found Lyra standing at her father's grave. "Are you certain?" he asked gently. "This is your home." Lyra touched the simple wooden cross that marked the grave. "My father believed in building bridges between our peoples. I can think of no better way to honor him than to help create what he envisioned." She turned to Magne, her expression resolute but her eyes betraying vulnerability that she had never before allowed him to see. "And you? Are you certain your people will accept us?" Magne took her hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable when they first met. "Not all," he admitted. "But enough. And more will follow when they see what we can build together." The journey north was arduous. Nearly 50 English villagers accompanied Magne's people back to their ship, bringing what possessions they could carry and livestock that could survive the voyage. The Norse vessel was crowded beyond comfort, but no one complained as they put English shores behind them. At sea, cultural differences that had seemed insurmountable on land began to blur. English and Norse women shared techniques for preserving food. Children who could not understand each other's words still found ways to play together. Warriors who had once been enemies stood watch side by side against the common threats of storm and pirates. And through it all, Magne and Lyra found themselves drawn closer together. Their shared vision became a bond stronger than the differences of their birth. When a fierce storm threatened to overwhelm the overloaded ship, they worked as one to keep their people safe, their unspoken understanding requiring no words. It was during the long northern nights of the journey that Magne finally spoke of feelings that had been growing since their first hostile meeting. "In you," he told Lyra as they stood at the ship's rail under a canopy of stars, "I found the truth that shattered my false beliefs. You showed me another way when all I knew was vengeance." Lyra's smile was like the first thaw after a bitter winter. "And you showed me that not all Northmen are the monsters of our fireside tales." Her hand found his, strong and certain. "Perhaps that is what my father and yours both understood, that our peoples are not so different at heart." When they finally reached the Norse settlement, the arrival of English families caused a sensation. Some welcomed them with curiosity, others with suspicion. The Jarl, Eric, was initially skeptical but was persuaded by the practical benefits. The English brought farming knowledge, weaving skills, and Christian medicine that complemented Norse strengths. Land was granted to the newcomers on the fjord's edge, close enough to be part of the community but with space to maintain some of their customs. Over the weeks that followed, a remarkable transformation began. A settlement took shape that was neither fully Norse nor fully English, but something new, houses that combined elements of both cultures, fields planted with crops from both lands, children playing together and learning each other's languages. It was at the autumn feast, with the first harvest gathered and winter approaching, that Magne stood before the combined community and spoke of the future. "Our fathers died because one man could not imagine our peoples living in peace," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Yet here we stand, proof that what they saw was possible." He turned to Lyra, who stood among her people with the quiet dignity that had first caught his attention on an English beach. "It is time to complete the bridge between our peoples," Magne continued. "Lyra Ravenson, daughter of a man who saw beyond the hatred of his time, will you join your life to mine? Will you help me lead this new beginning?" A murmur ran through the gathered people, surprise, approval, a few mutters of dissent quickly silenced. All eyes turned to Lyra as she stepped forward. "Our beginning was forged in blood and distrust," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion that shone in her eyes. "Let our future be built on truth and understanding." She took Magne's offered hand. "Yes, I will join my life to yours." The wedding that followed combined traditions of both peoples, Norse hand fasting alongside Christian prayer, mead horns shared with English wedding bread, dancing that began as separate cultural expressions but gradually merged as the night progressed and inhibitions eased. As the celebrations continued around them, Magne and Lyra slipped away to the edge of the fjord, where moonlight turned the still water to silver. "Do you think they would be proud?" Lyra asked softly. "Our fathers." Magne gazed out at the water, then back to the lights of the settlement where English and Norse celebrated together. "I think they would see their vision taking root," he said. "And yes, I think they would be proud." Lyra leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "The schools will sing of this someday, how a Viking warrior and an Englishwoman built a bridge where others saw only chasms. They will sing of the woman with ice in her veins who faced down raiders with nothing but courage," Magne added with a smile. "And how that ice melted to reveal a heart brave enough to forge a new path. And they will tell of the Viking who learned that true honor lies not in vengeance," Lyra continued, "but in the courage to question everything he had been taught." Above them, the northern lights began to dance across the sky, green and blue and purple ribbons that the Norse called the bridge to Asgard. To Magne, they seemed a sign of approval from the gods themselves, a blessing on this new beginning that had emerged from the ashes of old hatreds. With the aurora reflecting in her eyes, Lyra sealed their pact with a kiss that promised not just one bridge between peoples, but the first of many to come.